So hi Philip,
Hey, how are you?
can you provide an overview of your role as the principal consulting arborist at Urban Forest Innovations?
First of all, I have the responsibility role in administration and keeping the company running, but I'm also involved in basically every project that our consultancy undertakes. I'm usually involved in the figuring out how the project will be undertaken, in putting a proposal together, and then giving advice along the way and also in a review role. Up until very recently, every single report that ever went out of the consultancy comes through my desk. Yeah, our consultancy is, I like to say, broadly based in the niche of urban forestry. I like to say we don't provide the services that everybody thinks you might as an arborist, and we do a bunch of things that nobody really recognizes that we might do. So in urban forestry consulting, we have some of the basic things like what's wrong with my tree, is it a pest, is it a disease, or is my tree a risk? And we have a particular focus in the risk of trees, in that I also have a particular focus in the conservation of trees. And in counseling people to conserve trees, I felt a long time ago that I needed to be secure about the risk of trees before I tell someone to keep the tree. And then we move to things like trees and development has been what we call a bread and butter of the consultancy for a long time. Inventories at all scales, starting from a construction site to a park, to a golf course, to a whole city. I work in the legal realm as well. And then I think something that's quite unique to our consultancy is bringing all those things together into urban forest management planning. So providing strategic documents to a community about how to better manage their trees over an extended period of time. And all of those aspects are things which I've had a personal interest in. And by growing a company, I've been able to stay involved in more things than if I was just a one-man consultant. I have also a really great team, and my team are the implementers, so they do a lot of the work. I mean, some of the work I do directly, but I have 7 other people that work in the company.
So altogether, how many people are?
8 people altogether in the company, including
Wow.
myself. It would be unfair for me not to say that the team is involved in all the projects. I may touch on the projects, but in some cases I only touch, but there are some projects that are particularly my focus.
Having been with Urban Forest Innovations for over 25 years, have you seen the urban forest landscape change in Mississauga and Ontario overall?
I think the definitive answer is yes, in a large way. First of all, if we start locally in my own city, things have changed tremendously. Where 25, 30 years ago when I started working as a consultant, the city had arborists to do practical work, but very little other, let's say, administrative level of roles. And today they have more arborists, but they have an amazing array of other professionals in other roles other than people who work on trees, working on a number of different aspects of what it takes to actually properly manage an urban forest. In Ontario as well, and I would say in Canada, urban forestry has really moved forward in a significant way over the course of my career since I started my company. And I think to a certain extent I could say that me and my team have had an influence on that change. I think we're working on the 23rd urban forest management plan. So in Southern Ontario alone, I think we have at least a dozen different communities that we've worked with, encouraged, provided guidance and we see the implementation of those plans having an effect, a positive effect on, let's say, the health and well-being of the urban forest. And it's, not just the work that we've been doing. The whole idea, the concept of urban forestry has expanded. There's become a recognition that managing the urban forest doesn't just take the arborists who cut the trees. It's engaging with engineers, with planners, with landscape architects, with the parks people. Essentially, all the different people in a municipal environment that can or do affect trees need to be engaged in the effort to move the thing forward. And that's what we see more happening. Many municipalities are also like Mississauga, where they've moved forward. Another example is when I started, very few communities had an inventory of their trees. So if you don't know where they are and what they are, how do you manage them? And many of those inventories were a point in time, essentially, and kept on a piece of paper, which we know doesn't really help management. But as we've seen in, the world is constantly changing, the sophistication and computer power. Now we see most communities have inventories, many of them have strategic plans, and many of them have been able to engage with the community and the council to raise the recognition of and the need for the urban forest, or green assets, green asset management.
Philip, you have studied both environmental science and urban forest management at the University of Toronto. So how was your academic background influenced your practical approach to arboriculture?
I'm not sure that my academic background has informed my practical arboriculture. I would say more that the practical arboriculture stage of my career has greatly informed my effectiveness as an urban forester. Because arboriculture is embedded in urban forestry, but urban forestry isn't necessarily embedded in arboriculture. But nonetheless, I would say that my academic background gave me a strong understanding of trees, of ecology, of how the trees interact with their environment. And after I did my undergraduate degree is when I started my career, practical career as an arborist. And so my master's degree in urban forest management was a way to marry my, let's say, ecological understanding of trees and how they work in the environment with my practical experience of actually being in the trees and managing them in the urban environment. And the master's degree was a professionally oriented master's degree, which allowed me to develop more of my professional skills, so communication, professional writing, researching, analysis, and all of those tools are more apropos, let's say, in a consulting role. But the background, the practical background of working with trees, working with people who work with trees, to have a firm understanding of when you make a recommendation that this should be done, that it should be rooted in some sort of realism, that it can be done, or it can be done reasonably, or it can be done with the budget that it's required. So it's actually been a very interesting path with me, which was academic, then practical, then academic, all coming together to sort of give me the starting point to open a consultancy and move into what I would like to say the professional realm of what we do, of working with trees. I think probably the biggest challenge that I had in urban forestry was when we got the opportunity after I graduated from university for my master's degree to actually write an urban forest management plan, not academically as an exercise, but to do it for a community. And I've been very fortunate through my career, and especially at the beginning, to work with a colleague, a friend, and a former professor of mine, Dr. Andy Kenny, who is really, one of a line of strong thinkers in urban forestry from the University of Toronto. Starting with, I should say, Dr. Eric Jorgensen, who in the early 1960s was at the University of Toronto, came there from Denmark, and actually was the person who coined the phrase urban forestry. So to a certain degree, the University of Toronto Forestry Department is one of the birthplaces of this discipline. And so Andy Kenny and I worked together, and he challenged me and my colleagues when I was doing my master's degree to write an urban forest plan. So my other colleagues in the program had to write a forest management plan. We had to write an urban forest management plan. And quite honestly, in 1997, as an academic, the first thing you do is you go to the literature and you look for what's been written before, what can guide you. And there really wasn't an awful lot about urban forest management planning. So we went through a process and developed a project plan for a small community. But when it came to the town of Oakville asking us to write a plan for their community, that was a challenge. That was a challenge to take all of the academics, all of the musing, all of the practice into a real life situation. And it was stressful. And I think any time you push yourself to the edge of your knowledge and experience and practice can be an uncomfortable place, but it can also be a stimulating place. And so that project gave us the opportunity to further understand so much more about urban forest management planning than what I know about the trees. So politics, big P politics, the council and the councillors and the bureaucracy, small p politics, the interaction between the residents and the community and the city, having to consider real life costs, budgets, unwillingness to spend more money. All of those things were a big challenge, I would say, and eye-opening, and through the struggle, we got to delivering over 3 years this first urban forest management plan. And I think that experience was, what set us in the right direction, but it was a big challenge. And it was really one of the first, if not the first, urban forest management plan in our province, in our area. It was a jumping off point to our consultancy engaging in that type of work in the future.
You are an expert in the field of risk assessment. How do you stay updated with the latest developments in the field?
I'm still always an avid reader, reading from information from all different sources. But I think really the most important answer to that question is leaving North America, going to other places, because that's, in the last 15 or 20 years, the world of risk assessment, I think, has somewhat stagnated in North America. Maybe some recent changes moving forward. But the innovations, the approaches, the attention to risk management, risk assessment in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, in other places has really just moved forward so much. So I've been extremely fortunate in my career to be invited to different places to deliver seminars, lectures, etc. And that has facilitated me going to these other places. And then when I'm there, I start to take in new information. And I think just always being inquisitive and always being humble with regards to risk assessment. And then I think I would be really remiss to not say that the way I've moved forward is to spend a lot of time with trees and to learn what the trees tell me about risk. Because most of the things that I had learned in the books, in the classic books, I've met trees that turn that upside down and they just don't apply. So in my journey in risk assessment, I think that spending more time with trees and tracking trees over time has really matured my understanding of what the risk of trees really is as compared to what it might be from what I learned. In the late 90s, in literature research, trying to find more information, I found one English article by Lothar Wessely and Martin Erb on tree statics and tree pulling tests. And in 2001, there was sort of a seminal conference that Kim Coder organized in the United States, and it was tree biomechanics, how trees stand up and fall down. I saw the agenda for that conference, and Eric Brody was coming from Germany to talk about and show about tree pulling tests. So I actually borrowed money from my mother so I could make that trip, and I went down. And I was like the dog on Eric's heels, you know, the whole time, asking more questions. And at the end of it, he said, well, you're the only one here that's really been this interested. He said, if you're really interested, come to Germany and spend time there and we'll teach you more about this. So I truly had an apprentice experience. So Eric said, well, you can come and, you know, if you want, you can, you know, if you can't afford something else, he said, you can just stay at the office. We have people do that. So I literally slept on the floor of the office when the office closed, put out the bed, stayed there. I spent 2 weeks with them, just basically immersed in their environment. I would say that not only did that help me in my risk assessment progression, but they also opened my eyes to what a real tree consultancy could be about.
So how does Urban Forest Innovations different itself from other arboriculture consulting firms?
I think that the easy answer is we're not an arboricultural consulting firm. We're an urban forestry consulting firm. So we're broader. We address, you know, things other than strictly arboriculture. So we have helped develop policy. We've been asked to develop a soil specification for a community for their hard spaces for growing trees. We've helped write bylaws or ordinances, tree protection laws. We work on just such a wide variety of things that don't actually seem arboriculture, while at the same time also taking on those assignments. I think another separation is that we don't consult out of a tree service. We are consultants and not a tree service. So there's a distinct separation, no conflict between prescribing services and delivering those services. Very separate. Another thing I think that is a distinction is guiding principles of my consultancy. Honesty, integrity, and professionalism are the guiding principles that guide urban forest innovations. I expect them of myself, and I expect them of everybody who works with me. I would say we work as a professional office, and arboriculture, to a large extent, is still an industry in most respects, but we really tackle the professional side of arboriculture and urban forestry. So we can easily interact with the engineers and the planners and the landscape architects and the politicians and the residents and the angry people and the happy people. You know, we work with all those different things. But from a science and knowledge base approach really is, I think, the distinction. And another distinction is that we never give up doing better. And in this world, you know, everything changes so quickly. We're always curious. You know, the company name is Urban Forest Innovations. We're looking for innovative approaches. Another advantage of traveling around the world and meeting people like Yarrick and yourself and the Broodies and the Jeremy Barrels from Great Britain and all these other people who are doing similar things but in a different environment and always looking for a better solution. And I think that's the key to success, is never being happy with where you are, knowing that something is improving and that improvement could benefit us, our clients, the trees that we work with.
Great. So it really means that you are not recommending any tree climbing or tree working company?
We do definitely make recommendations for arboricultural prescriptions for some trees that we work with, but we don't have another side over there that does that work. So I will recommend people who I know, people who are professional, people who have insurance, and people who have experience with the type of work that I would like them to do. And for the sort of more normal type of things, there's a number of companies that I can recommend. But in working with the old and ancient trees, the veteran trees, the historical trees, the number of people that I can recommend becomes narrower and narrower because the work is different and it's not commonly understood by everybody who works in the industry what those requirements are.
So it means that you are also looking for some arborists who are certified?
That's kind of a loaded question, but I mean, certification would be the minimum. It would be the bottom floor of the reference. But I mean, it's different where I come from. I know that if you have a European worker certification versus a certified arborist from the ISA, there's a much higher bar that you need to cross. So in North America, the ISA certified arborist it's a starting point. Mm-hmm. It's better than nothing that we had before, but it's only an indication that you have the starting recommendation. But for me, it's education, it's years of experience, it's ability to work in a different way than just the normal. And it's based on trust, and it's based on philosophy, maybe. People, more and more, Joseph, what I think is really required is people who care. Mm. And so the people that I would want to work on a special tree for my client is someone who cares. Mm. And I think that's the bottom common denominator as well. But skills or certificates, that's only part of the question, really. It's who is the person, how do they work with trees, how do they understand trees, and what's their track record, what have I seen them do before.
So Philip, the urban environment constantly evolves. So how do you foresee the future of urban forestry adapting to the changing dynamics of cities?
Well, I think it is changing, but it will continue to change and improve. And I think the most important thing is, when we say the challenges of the urban forest. The urban forest is a really complex, it sounds like a simple concept. It's the trees and plants that grow in an urban environment where people are involved. But to manage across a city, you have so many challenges. People think, oh, the city isn't doing a good job. But most cities have 15 or 20% of the land. And then it's institutions, and it's schools, and it's private property. It's all, everybody else owns that land. So one of the big challenges in urban forestry is that it's that disparate ownership, that there are so many different owners. And you can have a city urban forest management plan, but you can actually only really physically implement that on the land that you own. So I think where some of the challenges moving forward and some of the solutions are more and more engagement. We have to get beyond talking with each other as tree specialists and learn how to speak engineering and planning and politics and even more importantly, become more effective communicators with the residents, with the people who live among those trees and who derive the benefits from those trees. Because no matter what the challenges are, there's challenges today, pests and diseases, development, climate change, I mean, you name it, there's challenges for trees in an urban environment, intensification. I really do think that what I said before is really the biggest challenge. It's engaging all those other players that influence negatively or positively the urban forest into what we're trying to do, which is to have a better urban forest around. We are the tree experts and we can help them, but if we don't get the engagement of all those different components, then the challenges will continue to be, steep. I think that certainly some of the, on the positive side, some of the things constantly our computing abilities are, and our, what computers can do, what our computing power can do for us can help us better and better understand, measure progress, measure failure, get better at this activity of managing the trees. I think also this idea that I mentioned earlier of trees being a green asset, green infrastructure, the ground we stand on, the pipes, everything else, everybody understands infrastructure and that it's important and that, if the water doesn't come in the taps, then we don't drink water. Less people put as much emphasis on our green infrastructure, that if we didn't have trees in the urban environment, then we would have maybe more trouble breathing because of all the particulates that are in the air that the trees are cleansing out. I can go through so many examples, but that's the biggest challenge I think that I see, that because there will constantly be a new challenge, a new pest, a new something that we have to deal with. But if we're not dealing with it more holistically and have all the players in an urban environment, A, recognizing that we have an asset, B, caring about it, C, providing more resources so that good management can happen. Because in most communities we've worked with, there are people there who are fantastic, who know what needs to be done, but they can't get the support. So I think that's where where our biggest challenge is actually having people recognize the urban forest, recognize the value of the urban forest, and recognize that they need to do something as well. You can't just say, what's the city doing? Because that's not enough.
So the collaboration seems to be a key aspect of your professional network. How do you collaborate with other professionals in the urban forestry and arboricultural sectors?
In general, I think a strong guiding principle is knowing your limits and knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at. But if you're going to be effective and you're going to, to be more effective, you need to know that, and then you need to know where to find and be willing to work with the people that have the other knowledge that is important in whatever assignment, whatever you're doing. We have, over the years, collaborated in so many different ways with scientists, with all those other professionals that I've mentioned, with other consultancies who, for example, one of my colleagues, Margot, has worked with us on the last 12 urban forest management plans we've written, and she's a natural heritage expert, especially on policy, but she's also a communications expert. And in urban forestry is really, from my experience, it's the most consultative consulting that we do, because we're the consultants to the community, but we need to consult so broadly within the community in order to develop an understanding, to have the lens on, because a management plan has to have an objective. Mm-hmm. That, first you understand where you are, then you create a vision, a mission, a guiding principles, goals, targets, something where you want to go. And the plan is simply some sort of method to get from where you are to where you want to be. So collaboration, it's an opportunity to build that network and that collaborative effort that's required to run an urban forest. And we find through the consultations We usually do 2 phases of consultations when we're working with a community. The first one, we call it the listening phase. And there we have some background, but we really want to know what people have to say. You know, do they care? Do they not care? What's important? What's difficult? What's really working well here? And what do they want? And the second phase is sort of the how did we do phase of consultation. So we go away, we take all the input, and we draft what we think is the plan moving forward. But then we put it out again to all those partners, all those collaborators, and say, did we hear you correctly? Mm-hmm. Did we get it right? Or do we have what you want here? And so I think I'm using the urban forest management planning as an example, but it's a good example of how collaboration is so important. Because if we just came in and said, well, we're the consultants, we're the experts, we'll do a little bit here, and then, yeah, here's your plan, we may miss a whole lot. And we may end up giving them something that actually won't be very effective for their community, and then you haven't really succeeded. We also, one of the people who works with me, Mike, he has a nice term, it's called co-opetition. So sometimes you work with your competitors for a common goal, instead of competing directly with them. It's co-opetition instead of competition. The art of it is being prepared to give up sometimes, and to give in, and to recognize that if you're going to collaborate, there's no point if you're not going to listen to the other people that you're trying to work with. And that gets to success, and it gets to better ideas moving forward, and new ideas, you know, because collaboration is about talking with people and intellectualizing, sitting down and brainstorming, and that's good collaboration to get to a common goal, I think.
So currently you are on a journey through Sweden and Norway. How was this trip influence your perspective on veteran trees?
Now we're getting down to the core of things. So just to start out, the conservation is another thread that's been in all of my work since I started working with trees. You know, I never had a lot of interest in running a chainsaw and cutting trees down. It wasn't my business. So conservation has always been there. And the more I got to know trees, the more I was interested in old trees. To me, an old tree is just far more interesting than 1,000 trees in the nursery that are all the same and don't have much character and don't have much history. When we start to work with older trees, you know, I mean, they have a history, they have a story. If they could talk, they could tell you a lot of things. You know, where I come from in North America, we have far less of these really old and ancient trees. There's an impression of going to Canada or going to the States and going to see those, you know, go to see the redwoods or go to see the giant sequoias. And yes, you can. But what you can see is 2 or 5% of what was there before. And those are very special places which are, you know, national parks to preserve these types of things. But when we get more in closer and closer to where people are, we have less and less of those old trees. Coming to Sweden is an opportunity for me to experience some of these old and ancient trees in their settings where they have been for so long, to be with colleagues who are similarly interested. And in our group we have people who are very specialized in entomology and understand the habitat value of these trees, and others of us who are arborists who maybe understand the workings of the tree a little more, and ecologists who are helping us to understand the tree as the center of a tree ecology. What this trip is allowing me to do is to actually be with these trees. You know, I've lectured all over and for years about conserving these types of trees and working with these types of trees. But there is no replacement for going to see them and spend time with them. And as I said earlier, you know, where have I learned what has been really important? Spending time with trees. And spending time with old trees is even more fascinating because it's a mystery and it's a puzzle. How did this get to be? And going, and seeing these trees in all different settings. I mean, to be honest, for me, the best of the best, what we did was going to these nature reserves and going to the pollarded wood meadow, which is a cultural, arboricultural, floral mix that's just, you don't find it hardly anywhere, and not even here anymore, but it's fantastic. It's so rich in so many different things. When we read the standard arboricultural textbook and it says do this and do this and do this and do this, but it doesn't have any of this stuff. It doesn't have ancient pollard meadow woodland ecology. It doesn't have coppicing techniques. It just, and it doesn't contemplate 700 or 1,000-year-old trees. It's so that's been fascinating. And then coming out of those types of environments to the types of environments where we've been in the last couple of days, in much more cultural environments, but also environments where the veneration or the appreciation for trees is obviously so strongly there. Like the royalty and the nobility, they wanted to have an English garden with big trees around them because they knew that there was something important about having that. And so we can see it there, and maybe that just further empowers me or emboldens me to think, well, why did they want it? Because it's important, because it makes them feel good, because it makes benefits for them. And so urban forests, we're past that time where the nobility got it and nobody else did. We're an urban forest. 80% of our population in the world maybe now is living in urban environments. We need to provide them with those same kinds of services and benefits.
Lastly, for those looking to pursue a career in urban forestry and arboriculture, what advice would you offer based on your extensive experience in the field?
Well, a few things, I think. Probably the first, go spend a lot of time with trees and all kinds of trees. Second, education is really important, and get a basis in biology, ecology, understand what a tree is, how it works, how it fits into the environment, what its requirements are. I know that what has helped me in my path in being well-rounded is the time that I climbed trees and that I worked with trees and that I was in the top of the tree when the big wind started to blow and felt how it moved. All those things are really helpful. They're not requirements, but they're helpful. And you don't actually have to be an arborist to get that experience. You can be a recreational tree climber, but spend time up in the tree and learn what the perspective of the world is from looking down. That's a starting point. And of course, education. Education can be arboricultural education. It can be general education. It can be master's level. It can be PhD. Education is always good because it teaches you how to get the information. Another important thing I certainly know is find mentors. Find people who know a lot more than you and are willing to share. If you really want a mentor, someone will be your mentor. You just have to find that.